Hello guys, welcome back. So today we're going to talk now about div tags. So in our HTML course, we have been talking about HTML elements in detail, and now we're going to talk more about something called the divs. Okay, previously in last session we talked about block code. My name is Dr. Zishan. Let's begin learning HTML. In HTML, the div elements are one of the most important elements that you would find. Div element is basically used as a container for other elements. Okay, so div element, meaning that div element is used as a container, so there is no visual representation or visual purpose of it other than the being the container. So whenever we use a div tag, basically it behaves like a container in which you put other elements, and you allowed div tag to organize and structure and define the complete structure within certain tags. Okay, let me show you an example what exactly I mean. So div element is by default a block element. So do remember that we've talked about block in the previous session, meaning that every time you use a div, it will add a new line, meaning that it takes available width and comes with the line breaks before and after it. Okay, then for example, if I use the div tag here, div elements take up all available width space. So even within my text, if I see this example here, you will find that we have a simple HTML document. We have a document type HTML defining HTML5. We start our page with HTML and we define internal CSS called style tag. Okay, so using style tag, we have defined our internal CSS. We have defined the div, block start, block close, and we have specified it just the background. That's it, nothing else. Now in our body tag, we given a heading one, so we get this heading. We provide some text such as lorem ipsum. Div, within this line we have provided this content here. Now remember, because div is block, no matter where you write, it will automatically come to a new line, add some space, and it will occupy a complete width of your web page. Okay, that's the key aspect of div that we were basically target. Okay, so that's the div tag with it. So how we use div tag is a different aspect to it. So div is a container. Okay, and div element has no required attributes technically, like style, class, id, and basically are common. So it does not contain its own elements, own attributes. You use other attributes like style, class can also be used with these things. So how does div work? Basically we use div to create and design components within our HTML. So what you see here is that this yellow border is entirely a container area. Within that container we provided London and then text here. How does this work? So for example, if I come here, we defined a body in our tag, we define a heading, HTML div tag. So this is outside the div. Within my div, I said, hey, this is a container. This container contains some content, some text, some information, some representation. How is supposed to happen? So we say heading 2, we give paragraph, we give paragraph. So look at this, how it is appearing. So it has a completely different structural representation as compared to a normal content. So if you don't use div, you still get a component. So for example, if I just delete the div here and delete this div here, okay, and then I run the content, so you see it just appears a normal thing. As soon as I use the div again, okay, and if I come back here, if I use the div, hit run, I just get this visual representation in form of background color, which is, by the way, because I have set div style in my heading tag. So in my style here, I have specified that, hey, there's a div in my content. This div is block start, block close, will have a property called background color. So div is basically like a container. It's like a grouping multiple items together, and then we can obviously give certain styles to it to make it look more appealing and more interesting. This is a commonly done. So even in this web page, if you see this example, this has a particular div around it. Inside div, we have one heading, we have text, then this itself is another div. Okay, so this div has a different style to it. Then we have another heading, then there's another div here that has a border and a content inside it. So div are basically used to structure components within our web page. They can be nested, and then we use it to organize our structure very easily. Similarly, we basically use div for many different purposes as well. We can use div with our certain CSS properties like width, like margin, okay, to set up how big or small the width we want. So for example, in this case, if you want the width to appear at the center of the page, we use these certain properties. So let me show you what exactly I mean. Again, now these are CSS properties. Okay, CSS meaning that we specified the CSS styles and control the div's position and size. So the content is same. We use body. Inside the body, we have a center aligned div element as a heading. Then we use a div with the content that we had previously done. But this time what I've done is I've given it a width. So I've said, hey, width is supposed to be 300 and margin supposed to be automatic. So auto will basically allow it to center it at the center position, with width specifically specifying it as 300 pixels alone. I can set it to more. For example, if I say 400, now it means the div has more space. I can say width a margin, for example, only 20 pixels. That basically means that now the margin will be only 20 pixels from the left, okay, from this side. I can specify that it can be different, blah 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 things, and so many controls we can use using our CSS. But this is basically what a div tag is. It provides us this control of div. We can use multiple div tags. Again, just like any element within HTML, do remember that there can be multiple div tags, multiple tags of any sort. So in our page, we can have multiple content, and each div has a different color, different background. So it's like a container. You can use multiple containers, and you can give different styles to your divs, different styles to your container. You can position them, you can alignment them, and by controlling div, one single div, you basically control the whole structure. So in this case, you can see this. If I have used this, I have a div, three different divs in my content. Okay, so in this point, we have div 1, div 2, div 3. Three different divs are used. If we come here, we specify the control content. So we have div 1, div 2, div 3 available within my code. Each div has this inline CSS called style. Inline CSS, they have a different backgrounds. That's all it does takes. Okay, but whenever we want to specify a style of div, we basically use inline or internal bit, depending on how we want to do that. So this time it indicates we have three different container. That's all. But if we want to use it, for example, in this case, alignment div elements by side, to do that, again, we use certain other elements of divide of div specifying, such as the containers and floating values, that would ensure that the div appear on a particular site. So for example, if I try this code out, now what we have done is that we have used the class attribute to specify what our div is supposed to do. So now what we have done is we have created one main div, and inside that main div there are three separate divs. Okay, and then we have used the div as by container, and we have provided its properties. So now how it works is that this is one container as a div, which basically means that there's a one major container behind it. Within that div container, we have now created three other containers that reside within this particular div component. Okay, so this div is there. Inside there are three more containers. No problem with that. The outer container, or the parent div, is known as my container. We have assigned it a class. So in my code, we have said that my content is supposed to be my div, and this my container is my div. It has 100% width, so it's going to take the entire web page area. Overflow auto will, this means that all its subcomponents will automatically overflow in a single line. Okay, then the child divs that we have created here, we were going to set their width to 33%, 33%. So it's basically dividing our web page in three different columns. Okay, so more about this CSS in detail when we start to work with CSS components, and we start to work with these overflows and basically these margin areas and floating points. Only then you would be able to understand this more clearly. So do follow along, and I will be talking about the CSS much more detail later on in the sections. Okay, so this is in a nutshell a simple description of what div tag does for us. Thank you for watching. See you in next session. Don't forget to subscribe, please.